everyone. I'm Abigail. This is Nico, and welcome to another Two Kids interview.
We are joined by the award-winning author Barbara Dee.
Some of her books include Maybe He Just Likes You, Star-Crossed, Haven Jacob Saves the Planet,
Everything I Know About You, My Life in a Fish Tank, Halfway Normal.
Violets Are Blue, Truth or Dare, and more.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of writers write to be entertaining. Your books are definitely entertaining, but also have real and powerful messages. Why is that important to you?
Well, I think both things that you're saying are important to me. One is to have powerful messages that I think kids are really interested in and maybe aren't in other books, but they're issues that kids are aware of and thinking about, maybe even worried about. The other part of what you're asking about is to be entertaining. And I think it's really important, especially when you're writing about a serious topic, to not be depressing or heavy. I don't ever want a kid to read one of my books and to close it and feel depressed or, disappointed. I want kids to read my books and feel hopeful, but also to enjoy hanging out with the characters. And so I try to put a lot of humor in my books. A book like My Life in the Fish Tank, which is about a really serious topic, mental illness in one of the kids in the family, has a lot of humor in it. Everything I Know About You, which is about a kid whose classmate has an eating disorder, has a lot of humor in it because the main character who's narrating the story is really funny. My next book, which will be out in February, is called Unstuck. You could see it over my head. That's the cover. And that's about a kid who has writer's block. And she's trying to write a fantasy novel and she's really struggling. And this story has a lot of humor in it as well. I think it's really important to mix the serious and the entertaining. And I also think it makes books more realistic because life isn't just sad all the time. There's always, even if you're going through something tough, there's always stuff to laugh about. And I think that light and dark combination makes a better story.
Your book, Star-Crossed, has gotten banned from some places just because Maddie has a crush on a girl.
Right.
Which we think is ridiculous.
So do I.
What do you think about important books like Star-Crossed and others being banned from schools?
Well, I think it's terrible. I mean, I agree with you guys. Kids need to read about all sorts of kids. They need to see themselves in books. They need to read about kids who are not like them. And I think that, if a grown-up thinks a topic or a character is wrong for some reason, instead of slamming the book shut or snatching it out of a kid's hands, have a conversation with the kid, read it with the kid and talk about it with the kid. But I can't tell you how often I go to a book festival and I have all my books on my table in front of me, and a kid comes over to my table and picks up a copy of Star-Crossed and starts looking at it. And you could see the kid's eyes light up, and the kid says, I want this book. I want to read this book. And then the grown-up with the kid takes the book out of the kid's hands, looks at what it's about, and says, I don't think so. And I always think when that happens, that this kid is going to find a copy of the book somehow. The kid will find it in the library or get a copy from a friend or whatever it is. And then the kid will read the book and think, this book is forbidden. The kid will read the book under the covers with a flashlight and think, I can't talk to my parents about this book. And maybe if I see myself in this book, if I identify with this character, there's something wrong with me and I can't talk to my parent about it. And what a terrible thing for, a seventh grader, a middle schooler to feel. I never want a kid to feel that way. If you've read Star-Crossed, you know that there's nothing in this book that should be banned.
Knowing that your books can get banned places if you write what some people don't like,
which we still think is ridiculous.
Which I still agree with you about, yes.
Would that factor in at all for what you write in the future?
That is such a great question. And I have to say, you're the first person, adult or kid, ever to ask me that question. And that's a real smart writer's question. It doesn't affect me at all. In fact, it just makes me want to continue doing what I'm doing. And it's really important to me when I'm writing a story that I represent all kinds of people in my stories. I try to have a diverse cast. And for example, in Unstuck, the book that's coming out in February about the kid who's writing a book herself, a fantasy novel, she's thinking about a sidekick for her main character. And she thinks, should it be a boy? Should it be a girl? Maybe somebody non-binary. I mean, it's important for me that I show teachers who are queer. I show all different ethnicities. I feel like, kids need these books, kids need these characters, and I'm not going to pander to intolerant adults because I feel like that's a real disservice to the reader.
We are glad you will keep writing them.
Good.
What is your process when putting a book together?
Do you decide the end before the middle?
Or do you put it together in order?
That is a great question also. I'm not one of those writers who writes like the middle first, although that is one of the techniques that the teacher who's working with the student in Unstuck suggests when she's stuck, just go out of order. I don't do that myself. I used to be, what the difference, I'm sure you've heard this in your interviews, between a pantser and a plotter, right? A pantser writes by the seat of her pants and a plotter plots everything out with a big outline. I used to be a pantser. When I started writing, I felt like this was a way of playing, and I just wanted to be free to sort of figure out the story as I went along. And then I switched over to being a plotter with Star-Crossed, and I used Romeo and Juliet as my outline, and I went scene by scene in the play to write my story. And I thought, this is so much better. This is so much easier to have everything all plotted out for you first. And that's who I am. From now on, I am a plotter. And now I'm sort of a pantser plotter hybrid. I sort of figure out my process as I go along, but I also have a real sense of what the whole story should look like before I start. So I'm sort of a plantser.
Can you tell us about a time when you were doing something and you noticed someone or something and thought, I need to put that in a book?
Oh, I can't think of a specific instance, but I do a lot of eavesdropping. I like to, especially when I'm on a train and there are people on their cell phones and they're having very loud conversations that they think nobody else can hear. I like to listen. And sometimes it's not so much that I use the details of the conversation, but I use the way that they speak. And I may even take notes and use that kind of dialogue in my book. I don't usually pluck things out of real life and stick them in my book. I like to use my imagination as much as possible, but at the same time, I'm always listening and observing people, because it's really important to be as realistic as possible.
What writers had the most influence on you?
Well, I read all sorts of different stuff. I read a lot of stuff. Right now, I'm sort of taking a break from writing because I'm waiting to hear from my editor, and I'm reading a lot of books for grownups. When I was a kid, I think the book that probably influenced me the most was Harriet the Spy. I love that book. It's about a kid who's taking notes, who is a writer herself. And that was, that was really very influential to me. I think when I was a teenager, a book that really had a huge impact on me was The Catcher in the Rye, because it really sounded like a kid speaking, just naturally speaking. And my books are, a lot of them are about how a character sounds. The character's voice is the single most important thing to me. So I think Catcher in the Rye was probably one that really had an impact on me.
How do you get the ideas for your book?
I get them from all over. I get ideas, a lot of ideas I get from talking to kids. My book, Haven Jacob Saves the Planet, which is about a kid who's obsessed with climate change and really worried about it. I got that idea because every time I visit a school, I ask the kids, what's on your mind? What are you worried about? What are you thinking about? And the number one answer that I've been getting is climate change. Kids are really worried about climate change. So I wanted to write a book, not just about climate change, but about how kids feel about it. So that's where that idea came from. Another question that I get a lot from kids is, how do you deal with writer's block? And that's why I wrote Unstuck. So I get ideas from talking to kids. I get ideas from talking to teachers, parents, school counselors, therapists, principals, even sometimes. I get ideas from reading newspaper articles, um, from the internet, from doing research, from all over the place. But a lot of ideas come from observing my own family, my own kids, and also I think about how I felt when I was this age. I don't write autobiography, I write fiction. So I don't use specific things from my life, but I use a lot of what I call emotional memories, how I felt at the time. And I don't think that changes terribly much if you were a kid when I was a kid or if you're a kid now.
What advice do you have for young people who want to write?
I have a lot of advice that I put in my book Unstuck. That's basically what that book is. So if you're interested in writing, I hope you'll read Unstuck when it comes out in February. But for now, I would say two things. One is if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader. So read a lot and read anything that you like. Don't feel like a book, doesn't count if it's a graphic novel, for example. Read everything, read nonfiction, read fiction. And when you're reading, think, why do I like this? What am I responding to? Can I use some of this in my own writing? Read it like a reader, but also read it like a writer. And the other advice I would give is if you're writing, share it. You can't grow as a writer if you write something and then you stick it in your desk drawer. You have to get feedback, and you have to learn how to respond to the feedback without getting defensive and freaking out and feeling attacked. You have to learn how to say, that person might have a good point, or you know what, I don't think that person gets what I'm trying to do. Maybe I can make it better, without changing it. It's important to not just abandon what you've done just because somebody criticizes it, but to actually analyze what they're telling you and think if they can help make your work better.
That's big advice
Do you also have a smaller tip, something you do when you are writing?
that maybe a lot of people don't.
One thing that I do is read out loud what I've written, especially if I've written dialogue. I close the door so no one can hear me, and I read the dialogue out loud because I think your ear can pick up if it sounds like natural speech. Sometimes if you just see your writing on a computer monitor or you see it in your notebook, it's hard to look at it and think that doesn't sound natural, but if you hear it, if you read it out loud, you can hear if it doesn't sound natural.
We are excited for Unstuck to come out in February. Is there any other project in the works that you have that you can tell us about?
Well, Unstuck is coming out February of 2024. The following year, February of 2025, I have a book called Tear This Down coming out. And this one, excuse me, is about a girl who is doing a research project for her social studies class in 7th grade. And she's researching the most famous resident of her town, who was a 19th century thinker. He was a newspaper editor. He advised President Lincoln. He was an abolitionist, which means he was against slavery. He was an important person, but he did not think women should have the right to vote. And when this girl finds this out, she is really angry and upset, and she wants the big statue of him in the middle of the town to be taken down, and she wants his name to be removed all over town because the town is named after this guy. All the streets have his name on it. Her middle school has his name on it. And she's really offended by this, and she wants to put up a statue to this crusader for women's rights instead. So that's what that book is about, and it will be out in February of 2025.
I want to read that.
Me too.
Good.
Finally, it's time for our Turbo 10.
10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Uh-oh. Sure.
Number 1. What is your favorite phrase to use?
to be honest.
Number 2, what is one subject you love to learn more about?
Music.
Number 3, what is your go-to snack food?
Cookies.
Number 4, was your favorite book growing up?
Harriet the Spy.
Number 5, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Italy.
Number 6, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
That's actually in the book Unstuck. Invisibility.
Number 7, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Bugs Bunny.
Number 8, what is your favorite rainy day activity?
Reading.
Number 9, if you could have any 3 learning guests, who'd they be?
Lin-Manuel
No.
Miranda, Rachel Maddow, and Shakespeare.
Number 10. Number 10. What's the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Don't give up.
You were outstanding. Thank you for doing that.
And thank you so much for spending this time with us.
We can't
Thank
wait to
you.
read your future books.
Great. Stay in touch, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.